Hey guys! In our next installment of my interview with Gaylinn, practicing psychotherapist, we talk about how to overcome fear and trauma and go all the way into how to keep your mind in a constant state of flow, including why you backslide and obstacles to overcoming fear permanently. Let's do it! That very subtle, delicate balance of like being really enthralled in an idea and not being able to let it go, and then the opposite where you think, okay, well, I'll let it go, and you end up suppressing it because you're just going to the other side of that coin.
Right. Yeah.
So is there like a model that you've learned to
Yeah.
kind of describe how to
Right.
keep hold of that kind of middle balance where the flow of your consciousness is
I mean,
able
I
to
think
kind
it's a
of
good
go
question.
free?
I mean, obviously, if it's doing them harm, if it's obviously getting in their way, if it's obviously sort of undermining their efforts or keeping them from, for example, getting allowing themselves to show up in a relationship, let's say with another person, or freeing themselves up to do what it is that they really want to do but are scared, you know.
Hmm.
And so perhaps fear is a good, marker. You ask for a model. This isn't so much model, but like the presence of fear and how they are dealing with fear. Are they facing
Okay.
it? Are they fleeing from it?
How would want to describe that relationship with fear and
hmm
keeping yourself in the flow state?
hmm I mean, this is new territory for me somewhat. I appreciate these questions. Because, haven't thought about it in quite this level of detail, but I do think that there's a value in sort of keeping your fear front and center. Sort of keeping it out in front of you, and you know what you're afraid of, and you're facing it directly, and you're um, because oftentimes there's a reason why it's having that kind of effect on you in the first place. I think it was Swiss psychoanalyst Carl Jung, sort of contemporary protege of Freud's, who said that
Yeah.
the cave of fear is where you're gold. I'm paraphrasing. I'm probably butchering the quote, but like the gold of your life is sort of guarded by the dragon of fear. Is the
Interesting.
what I take from it. It's this idea that
Right.
those dark caves are scary to you for a reason, and there's sort of like a
Right.
trope as well in working with like nightmares or a bad psychedelic trip where if you encounter a monster or a something that is fear inducing, the encouragement from a psychotherapeutic point of view is to face it, is to turn towards it, is to not run, is to
Mm.
like you discover a door, open it, right? You discover a
Mm-hmm.
stairway, take the stairs, that kind of idea that there's something that's fear inducing, face it. And
Go for
there's
it.
he called it the conjunctio, where the integration happens, where you come to learn something. Your fear is pursuing you to teach you something, um,
Mm.
and so there's a way of working with fear in that, from a psychological standpoint, that I think
Right.
helps.
I think a lot of people would ask it in response to that is like, if you are facing fear, how can you keep yourself kind of grounded to the point where you're able to kind of flow through it, as opposed
Exactly.
to
Exactly.
like being there and then kind of
Right. Yep.
almost being engulfed with it, right? Because it's I
Yep.
feel it's either one side, either a person tries to face it and they don't do it in the right way, they're going to get engulfed by it and it's going to start
Yep.
controlling them. And if
Exactly.
they don't face it, I'd say that's where the repression comes in.
Yes.
So how like, is there a way that you can kind of describe to people in, like, if you are going to be facing your field, if you're talking to someone that doesn't have this ability, hasn't developed this ability yet, they've been running from their fear their entire
Yeah.
life and they're in this rut because of it,
Yeah.
what's the first step that they can take to kind of
Yeah.
like gauge themselves on, like,
Right.
how am I going to turn around and face
Yep.
this?
Right. Well, that's I think the right question, and it goes back to something we mentioned earlier in this call, which is developing a resource state, like like a meditation or relaxation or a hypnosis
Mm-hmm.
trance,
Mm-hmm.
where You know, you want to engender a kind of safety in the here and now, in the body, in your mind and body in this moment, to the degree that you
Right.
can.
Okay.
So conscious breathing is a fairly reliable way to establish that, right? The breath will often precede emotional shifts before the mind even catches on to what's going on. So if you
Oh,
can,
wow.
as it were, catch your breath and sort of localize it, I like to bring it down into the sort of the chest or the heart, this idea of conscious breathing and feeling the sensation of the chest and the heart or the solar plexus, and sort of balancing the energy in that space,
Mm.
and feeling a sense of grounding, maybe some mental, you know, relaxation of the body where any excess tension or stress is sort of allowed to soften and loosen and let go. Then you know, you're in a grounded place, and you're physically and emotionally in a grounded place. Mentally, you're alert, right? And that's, I think, a good state in which it's like, okay, maybe I'm ready to face this fear. Now, there are also
Right. Okay.
intermediary steps you can take, what's called in the psychological literature covert desensitization, which essentially it's like working with phobias, for example, where a person may not be ready to face their phobia immediately head on. If a person is afraid of snakes or elevators or something like that, then you can warm them up to to taking that step by sort of first showing them a photograph of the thing that
Mm.
they're afraid of, and
Okay.
and
Yeah.
pay attention to how that photograph makes them feel. And it may in fact provoke all kinds of real emotional reactions, and that's a good thing, because in acknowledging that, like, oh, this isn't the thing that is actually inducing the fear, this is a photograph of the thing that is inducing the
Mm.
fear, and I'm bringing my whole story to the photograph that is not in fact the thing itself. Do you follow?
Okay.
So
Yeah.
there's a way of sort of,
And so
okay, go ahead.
would it be the idea of like making them conscious of that process where
Mm-hmm.
they're staring at the photograph of the snake, and obviously their mind's kind of rushing into all of these conclusions,
Yep.
but at this point they might not even be aware that that's happening. They're
Right.
just really afraid of the snake now, and they don't
Yep.
realize what their mind is doing to
Right.
invoke that fear.
What I like about this is that I don't know how conscious you have to be. I think a lot of this stuff lives in the body, and it's living in what you might call the unconscious mind. So by sort of looking at the picture of the snake and feeling the reactivity, and then coaching them through reinvigorating the relaxation of the resource state
Oh,
while
okay.
holding the image, now you're looking at the image of the snake and you're no longer having that reaction. You're
Mm.
in essence, you're extinguishing the learned response of image of a snake, fear response or stress response. You're
Gotcha. Yeah.
decoupling the stimulus from the reaction, and instead what you're conditioning is image of a snake, relax, right?
Okay.
And
So you don't even
now,
have to really be analyzing it. Like, I think that's like the beauty of what you're saying, where a lot of people would think that they have all of these phobias and fears and they're kind of in this box. They look to all of these like courses and the programs and books to
yeah,
read to try to get themselves out of it. But you're
yeah,
saying it really is more about the experiential of just
it
spending
is.
that,
It is
daily practice and building
very
that
much
state
the
again.
experiential, and that I think is very key, because, and it's always a bit of a balance, because um, experience and language are in some ways very separate. And so the art of the psychotherapy, if you will, is in some ways finding the language that the client uses,
Okay.
their way of interpreting and experiencing it, and sort of like, and it's collaborative effort, because they don't yet have a language for it, and I certainly don't know what their language is. So we're sort of collaboratively discovering that language together, through their own direct experience, and putting words to it and illuminating it, bringing it to light.
Okay. And then kind of bring it out, and
Yep.
then you're able to actually talk to them in the
Yeah.
way that they're familiar with, and then
Yeah.
connect it with them,
Right. And
and
that
help them
brings
experience based
coherence.
on that.
That brings a certain amount of coherence to their experience. And they're like, okay, this isn't a snake. This is actually a picture of a snake.
Right.
Now, like, and we don't stop there, right? Now, maybe we'll take a field trip. We'll go to a place that has a snake, or like find someone with a pet snake, bring the cage into the office. Or, I haven't encountered this in my practice. So this is entirely hypothetical, but this is how the
Right.
technique would work, is now you actually
Okay.
do have it in the room with you. Now it's in a cage, right? So there's some semblance of safety and security, but it's in the room, right? Now there may
Okay.
really be another layer of reactivity that evokes, and you process it in the same way you did the picture,
Right.
and then stepwise is the point that I'm getting at. The covert desensitization process, it has this stepwise of like, first this sort of remote abstract image of a snake or drawing, if you will, and then to a live one in the room,
Mm-hmm.
to you actually open the cage door,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Or they
Okay.
see
Right.
the snake is now being held by the therapist, and
Right.
maybe
Oh
they'll
wow.
touch
Yeah.
it, right? And and then maybe they, through this desensitization process, work up the ability to hold it. Now, obviously, the snake here is a stand-in for anything we're afraid of.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's like building that kind of relaxation state, and then biting off pieces of the fear and
Yeah,
going further and further
yeah,
along with it
yeah,
as you go.
right.
And do you find like adding
Yeah,
to that process, what would you say would be the factors that would make it permanent? Because I feel
yeah,
there'd be a lot of situations where maybe you'd be able
yeah,
to get with hypnosis, you'd be able to get somebody to a point where they could even like be touching the snake, but
yeah,
then maybe the next day they wake up and they're like, oh my God, I
yeah,
can't believe I did that, and they go
yeah.
right back to the
Yeah, they may go back. Well, you
yeah.
want to sort of um, maintain it, right? You want to change that behavior. So you're right. Like you would hope that the mind will generalize. In fact, that was what I wanted to sort of touch on next. Was that um, I think that when people find that they can overcome their fears, they're not necessarily attached to um, stopping there. You know what I'm saying? Like they will realize that, like, oh, if I can overcome this fear, what else can I overcome? What else? And
Mm.
this is where we get into sort of this human potential idea that like,
Right.
when we have a direct experience of the ways in which we're holding ourselves back arbitrarily for whatever
Mm.
reason, then
Mm-hmm.
I think we have a taste of like, oh, there's more. I have a potential in me that I didn't realize, that I've been arbitrarily sort of stooping. I've been um, shrinking myself down unnecessarily,
Right.
and
So
so
you're saying that I guess innate sense of trying to strive towards optimization is a natural thing that's within all of us. It's not something where
yeah,
someone will look at it and be like, why is this guy
yeah,
how is this guy so motivated? How is this
yeah,
person
right,
achieved so much?
right,
It's just about breaking down the barriers to
right,
get to that ability of
right,
saying, wow, like I can overcome something
yep.
now. Like then your mind's just going to go in the direction of like, what can I do now?
One would hope. I mean, it's some. Now you also have to look at, like, if you're backsliding, there's probably a reason for that. You
Oh,
know,
interesting. Okay.
right? And
Yeah.
that may have something to do with, like, well, it's not safe for me to face my fears, because if I face my fears, then I really have to examine these other ways in which I keep myself stuck. And I realize that it is arbitrary, but that's an unsafe thought. Back to what we were saying before of like, what are you protecting? That may be a legitimate thing. It may mean that, like, I'm, sort of abandoning my family of origin because it's an unhealthy environment, and that's irreconcilable with who I think of myself as being. And so, no way am I going to overcome this fear of snake, because that's the linchpin that's keeping me sort of in that orbit, in this homeostasis, as unhealthy as it may be. which is, one of the things I wanted to touch on in this conversation is how, human potential, it does have this innate quality, but there's also a systemic factor that plays a role. And by systemic, I mean like the people with whom we surround ourselves, the context in which we're living, the resources that we have at hand, the community, the social, the family, the support, right? Carlos, as you know, is hip to a lot of this stuff. And one of the things he said to me was that, and I agree, we're all psychotherapists to some degree, in as much as we're all interacting with each other's emotional triggers and reactivity and personal history. And we're either good at it or not so good at it in terms of navigating it and not triggering each other and being supportive of one another, and
guiding people down the positive paths or negative paths, or right.
And so
I guess that comes back to the initial idea you were talking about, the flow of time, where like things are going to evolve in some way. But if you have people around you that are just like putting negative things in the light again and again and again, you're having that issue of the reinforcement of the negatives.
Yep. Right. And there's a concept in psychology of like intergenerational trauma or transgenerational trauma, where like the ways in which our parents sort of fell short in our upbringing are often reflective of the ways in which their parents fell short in their upbringing. And conversely, how we fall short in our in the raising of our own children. And that, psychotherapy is in many ways of sort of breaking that chain and stepping out of that cycle of trauma or abuse or realizing it and doing what we can to mitigate its impact on ourselves and on those around us. So we're less reactive. So we're less, we're more thoughtful. We're more sort of wise, that we're more operating out of a place of reason and virtue rather than, emotionality and reactivity. And that's a, very pertinent to what we see going on in the world this week and these days. And, a lot of past trauma, a lot of history, a lot of baggage without a sense of, without a moral compass or ethics or, reason or virtue to sort of guide us through it, unfortunately.
So it's a lot of past trauma that's being brought out now, and now that the energy's in the foreground, it needs to have a direction. It needs to go somewhere, and we need to have some place to direct it positively.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we can't even agree on the model. I think in many ways the religions served at least as a meta model, a metaphysics in which some of this process could take place. But, for better and worse, that those models, those metaphysics, in which this process could take place have been discarded or marginalized. And there isn't a shared worldview, a shared paradigm, a shared metaphysics in which to do that work yet. And transpersonal psychology is at least, poised to try to make that claim or to point that out. How successfully is another story, but at least I think that's the conversation we're having is, what can we know to be true, and how can we bring to bear these insights of what we know about human psychology and human nature and nature itself, such that we can navigate these traumas, these collective traumas and fears, such that we're achieving collective human potential, which is really the result of individuals achieving their potential, finding their place within the society.
So, how have you been with managing your fear? Have you managed to get your mind into a state of flow? Was there anything in the video that stuck out to you as a way to overcome a limitation? Let me know in the comments below. In the next video, we're going to move past overcoming fear and talk about how to reach your full potential. So until then, do what makes you strong, stop doing what makes you weak.